Hey, Rob here for Quadratec.com. As you can see, I have my Gladiator here with me in the shop today on the lift so that I can install some new brake lines. Now, if you need to catch up on the build of my Gladiator, you can click that info button to watch previous videos we put together where I've installed things like that new Rock Krawler Pro X 3-inch suspension or the Rock Slide Engineering step sliders, among a few other things. Now, at this point in the buildup of my Gladiator, I need to address my brake lines. With the new 3-inch suspension, well, these brake lines are just a little too short for my comfort level, and you can see they're pretty stretched out here when that suspension is drooped out. So today I'm going to be installing a new set of extended braided stainless steel lines from our friends at Crown Performance. Now, even if your Jeep is not lifted, almost everyone out there can benefit from installing a set of braided stainless steel lines on their Jeep. Now you have to remember that your braking system relies on very high levels of pressure applied to your calipers or brake drums to squeeze those brake pads against your rotors. Most of the lines running through your Jeep and in your frame are going to be a hard line until that is, of course, you get to your axles, and from the frame to the axle we've got this soft rubber flexible line. Now when you apply that brake pressure and your caliper is compressed, well, once it compresses, that extra pressure in the system can start to expand that soft rubber brake line. Now, by swapping out those rubber brake lines for a set of braided stainless steel lines, these are not going to expand under pressure like a rubber line will. So that means that all of the brake pressure in the system can be applied to your pads in your caliper or your brake drum, helping to greatly increase the pedal feel and responsiveness in your brake system. And then, of course, the additional benefit of installing some new braided stainless steel lines is, just like I'm getting here today, we can install some extended length lines to accommodate a new suspension you've installed on your Jeep. Crown Performance does manufacture their brake lines for just about every year and model Jeep vehicle, with kits available ranging from no lift at all the way up to 6 inches. So there's sure to be a kit that's perfect for your vehicle. Now, while most manufacturers out there use a 2-layer construction for their brake lines, Crown Performance actually adds 3 additional layers to that setup using a 5-layer construction for their brake lines. So they do feature that same inner Teflon core that's inert to brake fluid, so it's not going to break down over time. But then instead of just putting the braided stainless on top like most other manufacturers, Crown Performance starts with a layer of braided Kevlar. Now that's going to add some additional strength and durability to the brake line for you. Then there's a protective coating that goes over top of the Kevlar to separate it from the braided stainless line, again adding another layer of strength and durability to that line. Finally, they finish up with an outer protective jacket on the line, available in one of 8 different colors for you. As you can see, I'm going to be installing some red brake lines on my Gladiator here today. I've got some of the other colors here available as well. They've got a clear protective coating so you can see that braided stainless, a smoke color, blue, green. There's also orange, yellow, and purple. So there's sure to be a set of Crown Performance brake lines to match or accent your Jeep perfectly. Now, while I'm working on the brake system today, I'm also going to be installing a set of speed bleeders. Of course, anytime you work on your brake system, you're going to be opening it up and introducing some air into the system, and we've got to get that back out by bleeding the system. Now, the normal procedure would be to crack that bleeder screw and allow some fluid and air to escape and then close it while you're pumping the brakes. It's usually a 2-person job. But the speed bleeders simplify that job by using a spring-loaded ball bearing inside of the bleed screw. Now, when you release pressure, that ball bearing is going to close, effectively sealing off the system and preventing any air from making its way back in. The speed bleeders effectively take what is traditionally a 2-person job and turn it into a simple 1-man job to complete your brake bleeding procedure. Now, to go ahead and get started, the first thing I need to do is go ahead and start disconnecting some of these factory components down here at the brake caliper. Well, the first thing I like to do is go ahead and clamp off that OE rubber line just to help stop some of that brake fluid from leaking out once we open up the system. Then we can go ahead and remove the banjo bolt connecting the brake line to the caliper. And we can get rid of these copper washers that are on here. Make sure that the secondary one sometimes stays stuck here on the back side of the caliper. You want to remove that. Now at this point we can also go ahead and remove the brake bleeder, since I'm going to be replacing that with a speed bleeder. Then we can go ahead and install the new speed bleeder back into the back side of the caliper. Then I can get my new Crown Performance line. Make sure that you orient this fitting on the bottom here in the same way as the factory fitting. It should curve towards the back of the Jeep here. The other really nice thing about these Crown Performance lines is they use a one-piece fitting on the ends here. It creates a nice strong fitting. We're going to be reusing the factory banjo bolt with a new copper crush washer. So install the washer first, and then the banjo bolt through the fitting, and then the second copper washer on the inside of the fitting. And then we go ahead and thread this back into the caliper. Now it's important to note that these copper washers can only be used one time because they do crush when we're tightening this line on here. So you'll never want to use a copper washer more than once, or you could develop leaks in your brake system. You also want to make sure that you don't over tighten your banjo bolt. You have to remember that that bolt is hollow to allow the fluid to pass through it. So if you apply too much torque here, you could snap that bolt off. Now with our new braided line already attached to the caliper, the next step is to go ahead and remove the soft line up here at the fitting on the frame rail. And you want to make sure that you're using a flare wrench anytime you're working on the brake system. You definitely don't want to round off any of these brake fittings, especially if you've got an older vehicle and could have some rust on some of these fittings. They're very easy to strip out. Now by waiting to disconnect the fitting up top here until we already have our new line installed down on our caliper, it's going to greatly reduce the amount of time that we have the system open so that we can limit the amount of air that makes its way into our brake lines. Now with this upper fitting almost all the way tightened, I like to go ahead and twist the brake line to a position that I'm happy with, one where I think will keep it away from any interference with the tire. Then to keep everything in place, grab one of the spring clips and install it on top of the brake line mount. Now at this point, the only thing left to do here is to go ahead and zip tie the ABS line to the new brake line, but I think I'm going to do something a little bit different. Now, since I wasn't worried about damaging that factory brake line, I went ahead and just took a Dremel with a small cutoff wheel and cut these factory clips open to get them off of that factory line, and they work perfectly here on the new Crown Performance brake line to secure this ABS speed sensor wire. And then I went ahead and I slid this retaining grommet up a little bit higher on that same wire to get me a little more length out of it. And at this point, without any jack under the rear axle supporting it, I know I'm at full droop, and as you can see, I've got plenty of slack in that rear line. It's definitely not going to be my limiting factor when I'm cycling the suspension out on the trail. The last thing to do here is go ahead, give everything a good wipe down. Use a little bit of brake cleaner. You want to get brake fluid off of any painted surfaces that it came in contact with because it will eat through that paint. And by cleaning up everything really nice, well, it's going to make it really easy to spot any leaks when we come back to bleed the system. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and do the driver's side, and then we can move on to the front. With the front brake line disconnected from the caliper and unbolted from all the mounting points here, aside from the connection at our hardline up at the frame rail here, it's time to go ahead and start installing the new Crown Performance line. The nice thing about these lines, you can see Crown even includes all of the factory style brackets that secure the brake line here underneath the coil bucket. and even this little bracket that's normally used to secure the brake line here onto the factory control arm. Now, I don't have the factory control arm any longer, so I'm gonna need to go ahead and remove this bracket before I mount this on the Jeep, and I think it's just folded right around that brake line there, so I'm just gonna use a pair of channel locks and some locking pliers, pry it out of the way, and then I can get the new line installed on the Jeep. With everything secured and that ABS speed sensor wire clipped back into place, that takes care of the passenger side front. Get the driver's side done, and then we can bleed the system. At this point, I've got all the new brake lines installed and all the speed bleeders are currently tight. It's time to go ahead and start bleeding the system. Now we're going to start at the farthest brake away from the master cylinder, which would be the passenger side rear brake. You can go ahead and get the speed bleeder bag attached to the speed bleeder. To get started, I can open up that speed bleeder a quarter to a half turn and then attach the speed bleeder bag. Start up the Jeep and pump the brake system a number of times to expel some brake fluid along with any air bubbles that got trapped in the system while installing those new lines. We're going to repeat these same procedures working around the Jeep, moving to the driver side rear, then the passenger front, and finally the driver front brakes. You want to make sure that you're pumping the brake system enough times at each corner to push all of the trapped air out of the system, making sure to keep an eye on the brake master cylinder to keep that brake fluid level between the minimum and maximum lines, adding brake fluid when necessary. Once the air is pushed out of all the lines at each corner, you can go ahead and remove the speed bleeder bag, tighten up that speed bleeder, and finally reinstall the protective cap. With all four corners successfully bled, that takes care of the install of my new Crown Performance 5-layer extended length brake lines. At this point, I think it might be time to go hit some trails with the Gladiator to see what this new suspension is really capable of. Of course, the last thing I have to do is go ahead and make sure that my master cylinder is topped off between the minimum and maximum lines, and then of course, get those wheels and tires reinstalled on the Jeep. Now, if you guys haven't already, do me a huge favor and make sure you hit that subscribe button so be sure to catch the rest of the buildup of my Gladiator, as well as plenty of product reviews and much more from us here at Quadratec. And of course, if you want to get any more information on those Crown Performance 5-layer performance brake lines, those speed bleeders, or even the Mopar DOT3 brake fluid, of course, you can click that info button to head over to quadratec.com. Till next time, guys, I'm Rob. I'll see you out on the trail.